Hi everyone, nice to be here. Thanks Ami for giving me this talk after all the basic science talks. It was kind of nice to get a little bit of an overview of the challenges of some of the clinical scales. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about our platform. I'm from a company called Gilron Labs. Some of you may not be aware of the platform, what we do, but we make an app and a wearable that patients with Parkinson's use. About 15,000 patients use it. And they use it in order to manage their care, take medication, for things like logging, taking their medications. We collect a lot of Apple Health Kit data, so things like mobility, sleep, things like that. And we also use the same platform in the service of clinical trials. So in a lot of clinical trials, we had our fellow from CHDR talk yesterday, these kinds of platforms are used. What we are trying to do is really do a better job in linking the genotype to the phenotype. So this is done in collaboration with GP2 and ASAP. And this is one of the most recent papers published. And what I want to call your attention to is, though we have a fairly robust library now of the genotype and the different variants associated with GBA1 disease, associated Parkinson's, and also mild and more severe variants, the data that is underlying the phenotype is actually quite small as you go down this table, and if you observe the N in parentheses. So what we're trying to do is essentially link the large library of wearable data that we have with genotype data from GP2. The way this works is we have Stripe PD users that are notified inside the application that they're eligible for genetic testing. Through GP2, they're sent a home TASO kit, and then they receive their genetic results back to them with the genetic counseling from Indiana University. And then we can continuously monitor them for up to 10 years, and including retrospective and prospective data ingestion. Part of what we discovered as we were doing this is actually many of our patients have been through this process before. So they actually had a lot of wearable data on our platform and have been through GP2. So for these patients, we were able to essentially skip steps 2 and 3 and then essentially link their wearable data to their genotype data. What does this data look like? So we have a variety of longitudinal measures that we collect from both the watch and the phone. Things like anything from PD dyskinesia and tremor to things that we collect from Health Kit, like heart rate. We collect a lot of mobility events, sleep, and a lot of information that patients share about their medication, for example. So it's a rich array of data that patients contribute to this. And on the right, what you can see is that a lot of this data goes backwards in time. So at the moment they actually download the app, they can consent sharing all the data they've been collecting throughout the years by virtue of walking around the world with a cell phone. And you can see the amount of data on the x-axis, the years of data per patient. So it gives you a very rich longitudinal signal that you can use. I want to spend the next 3 slides really talking about what some of this data looks like in our larger cohort in one metric. And I'll focus on step length, but we've done a lot of this work, it's a data blitz, so I don't have time to go through it across all of these metrics, and then I'll skip to some of the genetic results that we've seen in this program specifically. So one thing that we see, and this is what I'd call construct validity, specifically on step length, for example, is that step length declines with age. And this is something that we expect. We're seeing in these 2,800 PD patients that as they get older, and this is cross-sectionally, they tend to walk slower. We also see an acceleration after the age of 60, and then longevity researchers, this is a well-documented phenomenon in tens and thousands of patients, so it's nice to replicate that. So it's, in all of these studies, I think it's important to remember that there's both a component of Parkinson's and aging that's happening here. Interestingly, I think one of the kind of strongest sets of data that we have is really showing how it's associated with PD progression and fall risk. So specifically, one of the beauties of being able to look at this data retrospectively is once a patient downloads the app, they can consent going back in time. So on the left, what you see is what a year of progression looks like with a patient's own baseline before diagnosis. And you can see on the x-axis on the left graph It's the percent change in their step length compared, each patient is compared to their own, and you see a decrease before diagnosis of their step length. But then once they start taking levodopa for the first time, also consistent with the effects of levodopa on improved bradykinesia, so that's aspect of walking, you can see that that improves. So that's a good sign that this measures something that we care about in Parkinson's. And on the right, you see, and this is in the larger patient population, how it is associated with fall risk. So over here, we give patients the ability to tell us every day if they've fallen or not, and we're comparing over here 2,400 non-fallers with 246 fallers. And though there's a lot of overlap, there is definitely an association. So the folks that are slower also tend to fall more. And we use this in the clinical setting to try and communicate something about the risk of falling if it increases within patient. You can see the odds ratio there on the bottom. It also, wrong way. Another thing that we do is we can look at this cross-sectionally. So it might be a little bit cut off for you, but on the left plot, on the y-axis, you can see cardiac fitness is measured by VO2 max, and on the x-axis is step length. So fitter patients take longer steps, they walk faster, but they also decline more slowly, which is what you see on the right when we compare the folks that are fitter, the top tertile versus the lower tertile in terms of fitness. And these are two independent devices, so it's a kind of really nice demonstration that this captures something kind of real in PD. Roughly, this explains, if you include age, sex, and BMI, 30% of the variance in step length, walking speed, and such things. Let's move now to the specific results that we've seen in the 143 patients out of our 500 goal that have gone through the whole process. So overall, we see an 11.6% positivity rate. I mentioned beforehand, when we did this project, we discovered that a lot of our patients have already been through it. So 80 of our patients have already been through this PD generation process, and we were able to link the data together. So that's what the colors signify on the left plot, and I'm listing all the different GBA variants that we've observed, which also is still small numbers. I think that we'll be able to say a lot more once we complete this and get many more variants, but the idea is, what can we say when we take these specific variants and compare them to this data? So let's look at two examples. I don't want to call kind of any conclusions from looking at any specific patient example, because I think we need a lot more data, but I think it's illustrative of the types of things that we can learn. So you see two GBA1 carriers that have been through this process with different risk alleles. The top plot is showing this patient. In orange shading is what we've been able to ingest retrospectively. Their date of diagnosis is marked with a dashed line, and the axis is years since diagnosis. So you can see a progressive decline leading to diagnosis before diagnosis in the top patient that continues. And in the bottom patient, the N370S patient, you see also less decline compared to the top patient, but a stabilization after that diagnosis, putatively because of dopaminergic therapy that's effective. So I think this is an illustrative example showing what's possible here. Finally, I think another thing that we observed in our cohort, and then I think it's useful to think about this in the context of trials, is on the left you can see our positivity rate in the patients that have gone through this whole analysis. But in the purple bar, you can see that in our overall cohort of patients that reported genetic results or the lack of them in our population of 1,700 patients, it's much, much lower, which means that there's probably an underdiagnosis of the genetic association of disease in a lot of these patients, and there's a lot more work to do in our cohort. On the right, I'm trying to show an illustrative example of what you can do with this type of data when it comes to, for example, a synthetic control or matching this in different trials. So for example, the GBA positive patients and matched negative controls don't show a difference in walking speed, but we kind of expect that. But you can imagine replicating this across the different wearable streams. So to summarize, we hope that once we assemble a large enough cohort, this can start to impact what we learn about specific patients in terms of personalized medicine, variant-specific complications. Can we make a digital progression index or even support different time-to-event analysis? And with that, thank you.